Good evening.
Hello.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween!
We are going to be reading for you two stories from a short and shivery book.
By Robert D. Souci. I don't know. We don't know.
Information down below. Absolutely. And
He's had this book for a long time.
yes, since I was a little kid. Don't remember the stories, but we have a soundtrack, relaxing sounds, sounds with 3 Z's. Give them a subscribe if you like the little sounds that we're hearing in the background. I don't know if they're loud or not. If you can't hear them, then they're for us.
They're for us to create the mood.
Making the mood.
Our candle lit campfire thing with the crackling candle.
And after a number of takes, we were drinking tea. What was it? Tea Kuan Yin? Tea Kuan Yin tea.
It's from Tenren, so I can't remember.
It's excellent.
It was decent.
Very good. Alright.
You want to do yours first?
Where do you want to end with? Why don't you do that?
You want me to do that one?
Yeah, why not? That sounds fun.
Okay. So.
Feel free to listen to these while you're sitting around your own campfire. I have no clue. And we'll
If I say this wrong, I apologize to anybody from West Virginia that knows this tale. I just apologize, because I'm not from there, obviously. So, really can't say this word.
How are you going to say it?
Talipo?
I was thinking Talipo, but I don't know, whatever.
It's probably nails on chalkboard now. Alright. So, it's a tale from West Virginia, no pun intended. Not so very long ago, an old man lived by himself in the backwoods of West Virginia. He had a log cabin with a single room that held a stove, a bed, a table, a chair, and a big open fireplace built of fieldstone. One night, the man sat eating a plate full of beans and bread, and regretting that he hadn't been able to catch a single fish in the lake behind his cabin, or bag a single possum or deer for his supper. That sucks. He was startled to look across the table to see the strangest creature he had ever seen, sitting on its haunches in the far corner of the room, staring at him. It had jaws like a weasel, ears like a fox, piercing yellow eyes like an owl, and a monkey's body, and was covered in bright red fur. But mainly, it had a huge, long tail that coiled around, and around it, the way a rattler coils on itself before it strikes. "What the?" cried the man. "How'd you get in here?" That's what you say?
That's not usually what I say.
That's not what I would say, I'm sorry.
Anyway.
He grabbed his carving knife from beside the loaf of bread and went after the animal. The thing gave a screech like nothing the man had heard before. Then it scrambled out through a chink between 2 of the cabin's logs. It's been a big chink. But it wasn't quick enough. With a single slice, the man cut the creature's tail off, while the rest of the animal scampered away into the woods. The man walked back to the table and stretched out the tail, marveling at its length. After a few minutes, he decided that meat was meat, and that was what he was hungry for right now. Okay. So he cooked up that tail, found it tasted a little like rabbit, and ate it all in one sitting. Dang, he was hungry. After that, he plugged up the hole between the logs, went to bed, and soon was fast asleep. He hadn't been asleep very long when he heard something scratching at the door, just like a cat. Pretty soon, he heard it call, "Tailipo, Tailipo, just give me my Tailipo."
Yeah.
Sorry if I say it wrong.
Now I get why it's
Tail.
Tailipo. Yeah, I think you're saying it right.
Now he had 3 dogs that slept under the house. He whistled for them, and they came charging out and chased the creature far into the woods. But only 2 of his dogs came back. When the man saw this, he cursed a blue streak. Then he sent the dogs to sleep under the floorboards and went back to bed himself. A short time later, he heard the same clawing at the front door as the creature tried to get in. Then he heard it call through a crack in the door, "Tailipo, Tailipo, just give me my Tailipo." Once again, the man whistled up his dogs from underneath the cabin, and they chased the creature all the way down the road, snapping so close behind that if it had still had a tail, it would have lost it to the hounds. The man heard the dogs giving chase until the woods swallowed up the sound. But a little later, only 1 dog returned. Who didn't see that coming? Again, the man cursed loudly. This time, he had his remaining dogs sleep at the foot of his bed. In the smallest hours of the morning, he heard something scrabbling at the window, like a night bird, trying to get in. Through the cracked glass, he heard, "Tailipo, Tailipo, I've got to have my Tailipo." Quick as he could, he flung the cabin door open and sent his last dog out into the night. He heard the dog charging around the corner of the cabin and heard the creature screeching and scrambling away. After that, things were pretty quiet. But the last hound never did return. The man stayed awake a long time, listening, but he heard nothing more. Finally, just before dawn, he fell asleep. But he woke up a few minutes later. He was sure he'd heard something in his room. He looked into the far corner and saw the patch he put over the hole was gone. Then he heard something scrabbling up the foot of his bed. A minute later, he saw a fox's ears, weasel's jaws, and 2 huge yellow eyes, just like an owl's, looking at him. He tried calling for his dogs, but they were gone. He was too frightened to climb out of his bed. He just kept staring while the red, monkey-like creature crept closer and closer. "Tailipo, Tailipo," it growled. "Just give me my Tailipo." But, the man stuttered, "I haven't got your Tailipo." Then the horrible creature, which was by then sitting on the man's knees, snarled and said, "Oh, yes, you have." And it jumped on the man's chest and scratched him all to pieces. There are those who say that the creature got its Tailipo back, and some say it didn't. But the fact is, that old man and his dogs were never seen again in West Virginia or anywhere else. The end. Sorry, gotta show you the picture. Creepy look.
Yeah, really creepy looking.
That was creepy.
Creepy enough, I'd say.
Yeah.
Eee. Don't cut off the creature's Tailipo and then eat it. Moral of the story. Or send your 3 dogs out to chase after a creature that looks like
don't
that.
eat meat you don't know where it really came from.
That was what I was thinking when he decided to eat it. I was just like, poor life choices right there. Put a Tailipo out the window.
I think we would have burned it.
Meat. How much meat was in a tail?
Apparently enough to fill his belly.
Yeah, barely. Let's see.
That was a creepy story.
Yeah, and the guy's still... Tailipo creature is still out.
Still out there.
In West Virginia, you said, huh?
The backwoods of West Virginia.
Watch out, guys. Alright.
Maybe not so backwoods anymore.
I'm going to be reading a folk tale from Costa Rica. and the name of which I don't know if I'm going to pronounce correctly. I'll let you guys look at it, and then I'll just say what I can think of. The Segua, a folk tale from Costa Rica. One evening, a young man from San Jose, the capital of Costa Rica, rode into a small town north of the city. He was on his way to visit the ranch of a friend situated in a lonely area, but he wasn't sure which road to take out of the town. He decided to stop in the local cantina to quench his thirst and ask directions. When the proprietor brought him a mug of beer, he told the traveler he still had a fair distance to cover. But, the proprietor warned, no one travels these roads after dark. Stay here. I have a room I will let for a few pesos. Then you can finish your journey in the morning. The young man shook his head. I have to reach my friend's ranch tonight. The older man shook his head. Only a fool would risk meeting the Segua. The Segua? The traveler exclaimed. What kind of creature is that? The cantina owner smiled, as if he was unable to believe such ignorance existed. Senor, he said, don't folks in San Jose know what the Segua is? She is a demon, and heaven keep you from meeting her on the road. I've never heard of such a thing, said the young man. Bring me another mug of beer, and please explain what you know about this Segua. When the older man returned with the beer the traveler had ordered, he brought a second mug for himself. He sat down across the rude wooden table and said, no one who sees the Segua is left with a sound mind. Strong men in the peak of health have gone mad from the sight. Some have even died of fright. He began to rattle off the names of the locals who had lost their minds or lives because of this monster. But the younger man interrupted him, saying, if she is such a terrible devil, why haven't I heard of her before? She prefers certain parts of our country. We have the misfortune to be one such place, explained the proprietor patiently. For that reason, no one here rides alone after dark. If someone must travel after nightfall, he always goes with a companion. Why? Doesn't she like crowds? Laughed the young man, who was beginning to feel the effects of his long ride and the beer.
More so the beer.
The Segua only appears to someone who travels alone, said the older man gravely, finishing his own beer and starting to rise. She appears as a beautiful señorita, smiling sadly and fluttering her eyes, pleading for a ride. But woe to the traveler who stops to help her. If the unsuspecting rider sits her in front, she turns her head. If he has placed her behind him, she will make him turn to look at her. In either case, his doom is sealed. How so? The traveler asked. When he looks, the beautiful señorita is gone. The creature riding with him has a huge horse's head with monstrous fingers. Her eyes burn fiery red like hot coals, and her breath stinks like sulfur. With a hiss, she will bury her claws into the shoulders of the rider and hang on like a wild animal. A horse, sensing that he is being ridden by a demon, will bolt in such frenzy that no one can stop him. What then? Asked the younger man, no longer smiling quite so broadly. Those who are found the next day, if they are still alive, will have gone mad from the sight of her. Nonsense, said the traveler, suddenly standing up and tossing down a few pesos to pay for the beer. I must be on my way if I'm to reach my friend's ranch tonight. The older man shrugged, gathered up the coins, and turned away. Clearly, he thought to himself, there is no arguing with a fool. The little town square was deserted. The traveler untied his horse from the hitching post and set out along the road the cantina's proprietor had pointed out to him earlier. It was a warm night. Not a breath of wind stirred the leaves in the trees on either side of the road. Nothing disturbed the silence, except the clop-clop of his horse's hoofs on stones in the roadway. Suddenly, around a bend, when the town was out of sight behind him, and no other building was visible, he saw a slender figure standing in the thick shadows where the trees overhung the road. Slowing his horse, the young man discovered a beautiful girl with a pale face framed by the black lace mantilla that covered her head, and which she held under her chin with her left hand. In the moonlight, he could see she had curly black hair, huge dark eyes, and deep red lips. "Señor," she began. Her voice was sweet, but so weak and weary that he feared she must be near fainting. "I am so tired, but I must go see my mother, who is ill. Would you take me to Bagaces?" "Of course," he said, bringing his horse to a stop and climbing down. Bowing slightly and removing his hat, he said, "My friend's ranch is just north of that town. You can spend the night there. In the morning, I will escort you to the rest of the way." "You are very kind, Señor," she said, in such a faint whisper that he had to lean close to make out her words. Then he helped her onto the horse, which had grown restive during their halt, behind his saddle. He mounted himself, and they took off at a good trot. A breeze had arisen to freshen the still air and flutter the leaves on the nearby trees. The moon and stars tinted the landscape pale silver. Several times the traveler tried to make conversation with the woman, but she didn't answer. She only leaned her head against his back and clung to his shoulders with her hands, as if she were afraid of fainting and tumbling from the horse. Abruptly, his horse, without any prodding, broke into a gallop. The woman dug her fingers into his shoulder, clearly afraid of falling. The young man was too polite to tell her that her nails were digging into his skin. The horse gave a cry and charged down the dark road as though something terrible were pursuing them. The traveler pulled back on the reins and shouted, but it did no good. His horse only galloped faster. Suddenly, he felt razor-sharp teeth lock onto his neck, so that only the collar of his coat saved his skin. An instant later, he heard a cry that came from no human throat, as the awful teeth suddenly pulled away a mouthful of his coat collar. He wrapped the ends of the reins around the fingers of one hand, and with his free hand he struggled to pry loose the fingers that were clamped on his shoulder. As shadow, then moonlight, then shadow again, washed over the horse and its two riders, the young man saw that the fingers clutching him were too pale. They were the white of bone, rather than fair skin. He heard another screech and smelled the creature's foul breath. He felt his strength giving out, while the bony fingers pulling at him seemed to grow stronger. The jaws snapped at the back of his neck, this time drawing blood. Then ahead, he could see his friend's ranch. He thought he could hear dogs barking to signal his arrival. Lights were burning in the hacienda. There were figures running up the road toward him, carrying torches. There was a final ear-splitting scream from the demon behind him. He felt his whole body jerked backward. The hand that was tangled in the reins pulled backward suddenly, causing his horse to rear up, then fall sideways. Both riders fell with the animal. The traveler was knocked senseless for a moment. When he came to, his friend, holding a torch, was staring at him, asking if he was all right. He nodded, still shaking from his near brush with death. When he touched his hand to the stinging at the back of his neck, his fingers came away bloody. He looked around hastily, but all he saw was a crowd of friendly-looking campesinos, countrymen, watching him. One was calming his horse, which was on its feet again. "Where is it? The creature?" he asked his friend. "What creature?" "The segua." "My friend," laughed the other man, "you stayed too long at some cantina. I think. The Segwa is a story to frighten children, nothing more. Still, next time you ride at night, be sure you travel with a companion. These lonely roads can be dangerous in the dark. The young man said nothing, but he shivered just a little when the night breeze brought the lingering odor of sulfur to his nostrils.
Dun dun dun.
So, that was a little creepy. So, we just got cut off a little bit at the end, where I was showing you the picture.
Battery stuck. Anyway.
Yep. This is the picture. Very creepy.
Creepy.
Yeah.
Wouldn't want that behind me.
So, very many thanks to the compiler, Robert D. Souci. And we will be eager to hear what you thought of the stories. And yeah. Give us a like if you like this video. Leave a comment down below if you'd like to hear us read any other stories that you like. Maybe we'll do reading in the future. Maybe.
Honestly, depends on you guys.
However you guys like it.
I mean, we love to hear ourselves talk, but
Yeah,
you may not. Anyway, so if you want to see more of anything, subscribe.
And boom, ring the bell. Get notifications. See when we're coming up. Woo! Alright. Thanks for joining us in this episode of The Werner Siblings. We're so corny.
Bad.
Yeah.